Couple steps. That better? Everybody over
You
here?
guys see Brandon? All right. Well, I want to say good job to Lydia and Becca and Joy and Annika. Your project's pretty cool. I enjoyed watching. Congratulate you guys. All right. So my project is titled The Mustang, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to call it at first. I thought about it a lot, I debated it, and eventually I came up with it. And I like the title, The Mustang. You know, it's named after my car. It's cool. And like on my project, I had several influences while I was working on my senior project. And three of the big influences I had while I was working on it was the ancients, you know, right here in that bookshelf right there. We all studied them, and I thought, you know, I went to them trying to figure out if they looked at something similar to what I was looking at cars. And I looked at Tom Penny. Tom Penny, when he taught us this year, we worked with him throughout the entire year, and he helped me see and understand other religions, which will tie in a little bit. And then I also learned about, my third point was my childhood growing up and my interest in cars and how I got interested in why I wanted to do the senior project. And so, there we go. So my influences were ancients, Tom Penny, and my childhood. And all three of them influenced me throughout my project. And the first one is the ancients. And I wanted to figure out who studied the same thing I did. And I learned that Aristotle and me, we both studied motion. Whereas I studied in cars, you know, Aristotle went and studied in nature. And maybe I was working on a part where Aristotle could see, he would just walk out and he would understand what he's looking at around him, and he'd take what he saw and what he had with him and learn and understand, study motion. He saw motion on the earth as linear, though a lot of curveball pitchers could probably tell you differently, but still. He saw motion when you move in a linear fashion. But then on a contrast, he said, in the heavens, which was space to us, but which he called the heavens, motion is curved, which is kind of like an orbit. You know, that's what I first pictured when he talked about that. When in space, you know, you have orbits around the planet, and that's exactly what Aristotle noticed. So he said motion on Earth is linear, and motion in outer space is curved. And then he figured out that the mass of an object is directly related to the speed of the object, which means he took a rock and a feather, and he dropped them, and he concluded that the rock hit the ground first, which meant that the rock's mass was heavier than the mass of the feather, which causes a greater speed, a greater velocity, which is why when you have a greater weight and you throw it, it goes faster than when you have a smaller weight. If you try to throw a feather, it's not going to go anywhere. If you throw a rock, it can go a pretty far distance. And Aristotle took that by just going out into nature. He could see, just by picking up natural objects, he could understand motion. And I thought that was pretty cool. And he said that motion continues so long as there is only an applied motion to an object. Removing that motion stops the object. So when you have an object, there's always got to be motion behind it. So if you don't have any force behind an object, it's not going to move. So if you try to throw a rock, your arm, if you don't throw it, you have that arm power. But if you don't, the rock will just fall. You know, it's not going to go anywhere. You have to have that motion. A rock will just sit there unless you throw it or unless it moves by some other force. And that's what he's saying. Motion continues as long as there's only an implied motion to an object. You know, removing the motion stops the object. And I thought it was pretty cool because as I studied motion in a car, you know, a car drives, but it's not going to go anywhere unless it has that power, it has that engine. Otherwise, that car is not going to move. It's the same thing with a rock. That's what I saw. That's what I learned from Aristotle, and he influenced me because what I thought the coolest part was we're studying the same thing just in different times. He looked at it when he was back in the ancient times, and I look at it now, and we're not actually that different. We both study the same things now and then. We worked with Tom Penny throughout the entire year, and we had to read this book called The Universe Next Door. And at first I was like, another book to read outside of my class? Great. But then I started reading it, and some of it was actually really interesting. We learned about other cultures, and I think the coolest part about it was studying the Eastern philosophy, the Eastern religion, where like the Buddhists and such, and Hinduism, like what their belief is. I'd always look at them and be like, you know, I'd judge a book by its cover. I'd be like, well, you know, they study this, that seems ridiculous. And Christianity is like the true religion. But, I kind of got to feel how they grew up and how they were raised and how they understood their religion and how they look at us as seeing the same thing. Or Christianity, that seems ridiculous to them, but to us it makes sense. And I thought it was just cool understanding it. Kind of tied into my cars because I'd always seen a car as just something to get me from point A to point B. I never seen it as I never knew why I worked. I never asked. And so eventually I decided, what I wanted to do with this project was I wanted to ask. I wanted to know why I got from point A to point B. The same way, I learned about other religions. I wanted to ask about why they believe the things they believe. And Tom Penny helped me with that. Let's see, that's what Judging Book Light's covered. Now, growing up, I don't know if a lot of you played this, but I always played with the Matchbox cars, little cars, you race them, and you play with them, they're fun. And I always played with them a lot, and, I had fun. I had this little toy car that I could push myself around in with, your feet. I remember loving that, right around all over the place. And so, I always, I had cars in my life since I was little, but the same thing is, I never knew or never asked why. I knew they had an engine, but I never knew how the engine worked or how it functioned until this year. And I always used it as, it's going to get me there, okay, I'll use it, but I never asked why. And so, I had cars I was playing with cars since I was little. And my brother's car, he had a Nissan NX2000, which I thought was the coolest car, like the best car out there. He had the T-doors, so it's almost like a convertible. He'd drive it around, and I remember loving riding. I'd always ask him, hey, can you give me a ride, give me a ride, give me a ride. And he'd be like, I just gave you one. So, yeah. But I remember loving, and that kind of got my interest in sports cars, which is why, I picked up the Mustang. Now, when I first started this project, I had to find, I talked to this elder, Mr. Graff, over the summer, and we discussed senior project ideas and what I wanted to do this year. And at first I wanted to get a pilot's license, because I've always been interested in flying. And since I don't have 20/20 vision, I couldn't fly for the Air Force. And so it had to be through private. And so I was considering flying, and my September came around, and I was thinking about getting my pilot's license. I was kind of deciding, I had to get my thesis though. And I wanted to write my thesis with my mentor. I couldn't find a mentor, I wanted to talk to my mentor first. And so Mr. Elder was going to be my mentor for flying. But at the same point, I wanted to fly, but I also wanted to work on cars too, but I was more interested in flying at that point. And I talked to Mr. Elder, but he had a lot of business during the month of September, and so I couldn't work with him at that point. And my deadline was coming up, and so that kind of pushed me over the edge to go back to working with a car. And so I found I asked around people do you know anyone who knows a lot about cars? Because I'm thinking if I'm interested in working on one. I was I need a mentor. And someone said, talk to Mr. Zimmerman, he knows a little bit about it. So I talked to Mr. Zimmerman, and little did I know, but he knows more about cars than anyone I've ever met. He can listen to a car and tell you every part that's moving and running, and it's ridiculous. He knows a lot about cars. I picked the right mentor. And so, when it wants to go, I'll let it. Alright, let's go.
Try using the computer.
Oh. It's a little squishy on the side.
Here we go.
I
talked with Mrs. Zimmerman. We actually met in this hallway right here, and I talked about it, and I asked him about a mentorship, and he didn't think about it twice. Said, "Sure, I'll help you." And so we got started. It was a lot of fun. And so the project was to restore an old, a beat-up car, a car that needed work. And I didn't have a car. I had no idea what kind of car I was going to get. I thought about it. I had no clue. And so what I did was I began researching and looking for cars. And first I went to my mechanic and I asked him, hey, do you have a car I can fix up, work on? He said he didn't know. So then I went and started searching Craigslist for a car. And my goals for this were to fix up a car. I wanted to learn how to do it. I didn't want to just fix the car. I wanted to learn how I could do it so I could take that knowledge and use it in the future. I wanted to increase my knowledge about the cars. Like I was saying before, how they get from point A to point B. I want to know how they do it, not that they do it. I want to know how they do it. And I wanted to, gain some independence, be able to do it myself, be able to fix it and learn. And that happened during the project. There was one point where I was working on the car. I was doing it by myself, and it felt pretty good. In the future, saving money too, working on the car. and I can teach other people, which is really cool. And so I started searching Craigslist. I'd search it every night when I got home from school and looking just for cars I could fix up. And I couldn't find a car that was in too good a shape, because otherwise there'd be no work. But I didn't want to find one that was completely falling apart that I couldn't fix up in a year. And so I searched and searched, and eventually I found a 1994 Ford Mustang for sale. And I took it to my mechanic when I got it, and I asked him, hey, I laid out my project and what I had to do and what I wanted to do, my goals for it. And he said, this is a good car, it's got some problems which you can fix, and I think it will make a good project car. So we worked with the guy, we bought the car, and we brought it up to the Zimmermans, and we started our work. Now, the first lesson I had with Mr. Zimmerman, we didn't open the car doors, we didn't even go near the car, we just talked about the engine. We discussed how the engine ran, because I had no clue. I just knew there was a big block of metal. That's about it. I didn't know how it worked. And so we took the engine, and he started talking about it. He explained to me that the engine is run by pistons. That's what gives it its power. And you'll hear like a V6 or a V8 or an inline 4 or straight 4. These are pistons. These are types of engines. My Mustang has a V6, which means it has 6 pistons, 6 of these right there. My dad's Focus has an inline 4, which is 4 cylinders, which are 4 of those. Faster cars like Ben's truck is a V8. It's got 8 pistons. It's just the amount of power you have. See, I'm not planning on towing mowers and stuff like Ben does, so I don't need a V8. Right. And so I'm going to explain all gas engines for cars are 4-stroke, which means that you have 4 cycles. And on each, that's how it works. So on the first cycle is the intake. It takes in a mixture of air and fuel, and it pulls it into that cylinder. Then on the second, it moves on to the second cycle and compresses. So the piston comes down, taking in the air and fuel, and then it goes back up on the compression cycle, compressing that fuel and air mixture, so that when it gets to the third step, it has more power. So on the third step, when that piston goes all the way up, compressing that fuel and air, a spark is emitted from that spark plug, and it makes the fuel and air combust, sending the piston back down, and then moving that crankshaft down there. Then on the fourth step, it sends out that burnt up gas and air mixture right out the exhaust port on the right. And then it repeats, the piston's back up, and it goes back down to the intake cycle all over again. And as it goes through those 4 cycles, it constantly goes through that every time your engine runs, which is what powers it. Now, A is the intake valve. This is what lets in that fuel and air mixture. When you're on your intake cycle, when that piston goes down, that valve opens up, allowing fuel and air to go into the piston cylinder. B is the valve cover. So you wouldn't think this is an important part, but it protects those valves. You don't want them to wear down, because it will cost you a lot more money to replace those valves than it would to replace the cover. And so that it just protects those valves and the crankshaft and the camshaft. C is the intake port. So this is where your fuel and air mixture comes in. It's pre-mixed, and it goes through there into your intake port. The valve opens up and it goes into the cylinder. That's how it gets into the cylinder. So D is the head. This is the head of this is the piston head. It's on top. It sits on top of the block, and it's made out of like a tough metal, and allows the valve covers to sit on top of it and let in fuel and air mixture. This is the coolant. So when your piston, these explosions are happening all the time inside this piston, and it gets really, really hot. And so what the coolant does is it transfers that heat energy from inside the piston into the coolant, and it takes that heat away and cools it off, and then brings back cold water and coolant, and it does the same thing over and over and over again, cooling off your piston so you don't burn up your piston rings, or you don't damage the piston itself. And that you have to have coolant in your car, otherwise your engine won't last very long. And that's what keeps it cool, and it's inside the walls of the cylinder. F is the engine block. This is like the center of your car. This is what weighs a lot. It's usually made out of cast iron, and so all your pistons sit in it into one piece. And it's like welded all together. And you see people talk about your engine block. It's what weighs the most. Your 500-pound, 600-pound engine block. It's heavy. G is the oil pan. So this is where your oil is stored. When you get your oil changed every 3,000 miles, your oil sits there, and it keeps everything moving. It keeps your parts moving smoothly. Your oil is the crankshaft and the rod and everything. And see, as the camshaft, as you go through the cycles, that crank goes down into the oil, dips in, and comes back out, keeping all the joints and all the limits and everything moving smoothly. Now H is the oil stump. That's where your oil sits. when you put new oil into your car, it builds up right there, and it keeps everything, like I said before, keep it moving smoothly and keep everything running. I is your camshaft. So your camshaft is that blue up there. You can't see it, but it actually goes, it's long. And same thing with the camshaft, or I mean the crankshaft. The camshaft opens and closes your valves timed perfectly with your crankshaft, so that the 4 cycles. So when your crank is pulling down that piston for intake, your camshaft is moved by that. Your camshaft moves that valve, allowing that air and fuel mixture to come in. And then it's timed perfectly so that closes that valve as it goes back up to the compression stroke. And so the camshaft works closely with the crankshaft, and they're connected by a belt with 2 pulleys. On the end of that crankshaft, there's a pulley. At the end of that camshaft, there's a pulley. They're connected by a belt. The pulley on the camshaft is smaller than the one on the crank, so that you have like 4 or 5 rotations for each camshaft pulley. We only have 1 for the crankshaft, and it opens and closes the valves perfectly timed. J is the exhaust valve. So on your 4th stroke, on number 4, where the arrow is pointing right now, this is actually the exhaust stroke right here. When the camshaft, so this is the 4th stroke, when that piston is going up, pushing out that fuel and air mixture, and that valve is open, that valve opens up. Just like the intake valve, the intake valve is closed, but the exhaust valve opens up, pushing out that burnt up air and fuel mixture out through a pipe, through your muffler, and out the back of your car. So that's what you see, that burnt up fuel and air mixture is what you see in the back of your car. K is the spark plug. So this is what starts your combustion cycle. If you see a number 1, 2, 3, 4, if you see a number 2, there's a little white notch. That's where the spark plug is set. It's right at the very end of the compression cycle, right before the combustion cycle. This is what sets off the combustion cycle. When that spark goes off, it makes that combustion, sending the piston back down. And when you have like faulty spark plugs, you'll miss timing, and it's what your piston won't fire. But you have to have a spark plug. There's actually some over there if you guys want to look at them. I'll show them you guys later. You can stop by. You want to pass them around too. L is the exhaust port. So this is the same as the intake port. When that valve opens, it allows the fuel and air compressor to go out through that exhaust port and out to the muffler and out to the exhaust pipe. And so it's just like an opening from the opening in the piston that allows the burnt up fuel and air mixture to go out. M is the piston. So the piston is what goes up and down and powers and turns the crankshaft. So it's like it generates what makes the 4 cycle work. It goes down up every time you go through a 4 cycle. It goes down for the intake, up for the compression, down for the combustion, and back up for the exhaust. So it moves 4 times on each stroke, on each cycle. And you can see it's connected. Well, I'll get there. Yeah, and it's a connecting rod. It connects the piston to the crankshaft. And the bearings, they have bearings on each end. They have a bearing on there's a little circle there. There's a bearing on the piston, there's a bearing on the crankshaft. And they allow it to move in a circular motion. It transfers the up and down motion to circular motion, which allows your wheel to turn, which it will eventually allow your wheel to turn. And so the bearings allows that transfer of motion. P is the crankshaft, which I've been talking a lot about. And the crankshaft is it's a long metal piece that turns the rods, turning the pistons. So on an inline 4-year, it's only turning 4 pistons. On my car, it's turning 6. So you have in my car, there's 6 of these, all running they fire at different times. So that way it's not too bumpy. Because if they all fire at the same time, it would be really rough driving. And so it allows it to fire at different times, allowing your car to move smoothly. So train engines work the same way. Actually, me and Mrs. Zimmerman added this to my project just this week because we started just talking about it. And train engines work the same way. As you can see, there's a piston. On the bottom left picture, there's a piston right there. Take that piston, turn it sideways, and put it on a train, and they work the same way. Instead, they use steam though. So they take the steam it's a 2-stroke and not a 4-stroke engine. So it takes in steam and then sends it back out on each 2 strokes. The first stroke takes in steam, compresses it, and then sends it back out. And that's how it powers a train. That long piece is a rod and a crank. The top you can see the crank pretty well, and the rod. And it's connected to the piston right there on the wheels, which turns the wheels and powers the train. So once you have that energy from your engine, you got to send it to your wheels. But if you send the full force of your engine to your wheels, your car's going to go crazy. You won't be able to drive it. That's why you have a transmission. That transmission takes that energy from your engine and regulates it before it sends it to your wheels. So this is like a breakdown of a manual transmission. As you can see, the shifter stick there. There's actually, you can see the fork, which is this right here. On a manual, there's actually 3 of them. On a 5-speed, like my dad's car, like my Mustang, there's 3. There's 3 rods, so it's just a view looking at it straight. There's actually 3. The first rod, which you can see right now, it selects your first and second gear. So when you shift that stick forward, up, and left, it selects that first gear. But when forward, left, and back, it goes to second gear. And what this does is, your engine is always turning that green gear, turning those lay shafts. So your engine's always running when you type the car on. But when you want to go at a slower speed, like 10 to 15 miles an hour, you want to select your first or second gear because it's a bigger gear. It's all about ratios in a transmission. On your first gear, say your first gear has 100 teeth, and your lay shaft only has like 10. So your engine's turning that lay shaft maybe 20 times, but your first gear is only turning maybe once, which allows you to go at slow speed. But then when you want to go on a faster speed, you'd select fifth gear, back, up, forward, which gives you a much smaller gear, and the ratio of the lay shaft to that smaller gear is almost the same, allowing the wheel speed to go almost as fast as the engine speed, allowing you to, as fast as 80, 90 miles an hour. And so when you want to go in reverse, you can see that idler gear there. It transfers that motion of lay shaft in the opposite direction, allowing you to turn your drive shaft in the opposite direction, turning your wheels in a reverse motion. And see, once you regulate your speed with these gears, it goes down through the drive shaft into the differential. And this is a differential on a truck. As you can see here. This is your drive shaft. That comes from your transmission into your differential. And your differential takes that motion and transfers it to your wheels. See, the differential comes in, and to receive your gears, it changes that motion of your drive shaft once it's been regulated by your transmission and changes it into a rotation of the wheels. So through those sets of gears, it changes the motion circular to the same circular motion but in a different direction. And that's how you take the power from your engine, regulated through your transmission, down to your drive shaft, into your differentials, and then to your wheels. Now, the first job we worked on, the first project we did was the windows on my car, because they didn't go down, and every time you press the button, you get this awful clicking noise. And Mrs. E said, before we even started pulling apart the doors, Mrs. Zimmerman said, listen to it and see what can you assume just listening to it. I had no idea. And he said, it makes that noise, which means the engine, the motor still works, so it may not be a problem with the motor, but something connected to that motor. And we found out it was actually something that was connected to the motor. So we pulled off this paneling here, as you can see the paneling's on right now. And this is not the inside of my car door, but it's similar. And this is actually a Volkswagen car door, but I want you guys to see the inside of it and how it looks. You have that metal frame there, and on my car, the motor's inside that frame. So we had to pull out the speaker, see the speaker right there in the left corner? We had to pull it out and then put our hand in through the speaker hole. And once we unbolted all the parts in the motor, so we could pull it out through that speaker hole. That took a little while and a little, failing and complaining a little bit, but we got the motor out and all that. And we were able to look at the motor. And this is the exact same motor my car window has. It's a typical Ford window motor. And it works by an electrical signal sent to the motor, which powers the motor and turns a worm gear, which is where you see that long part coming out of the box that goes up. The worm gear spins like this, so it's like a cylinder. It turns, and it turns a bigger gear inside that circular. It turns a bigger gear inside the circular area, which is also connected to a smaller gear. And those two gears are connected by this little piece of rubberish, it's like kind of rubber. But over the years of my car, 14 years, it had gotten hardened and then shattered. And so it no longer turned those two gears as one, which is why the window didn't move. Instead, the gears just turned, one gear turned, this gear didn't, why you hear the clicking noise. And so what we did was we cleaned it out, we pulled out all the little parts. And instead of buying a new motor, which would cost $88, I had the idea to cut up a little piece of air pressure hose. And we used about half an inch tall. And we stuck it, we needed 3 for each motor. See, the right window had the same problem as the left. So we took each piece of the pressure hose and we stuck it inside the gears of the motor and allowed the motor to turn once again. And what this is for, what this separates the gears for, so when you hold down the button, when you're turning on the window, and you hold it down, the window's already all the way down, and you hold it down, it doesn't damage the gears and doesn't put them off track. And it just allows, it's like a torque dampener is what we called it. And then, our focus was not part of the story, or it wasn't going to be, but since we had 5 people learn how to drive a stick shift on this car, the clutch took a lot of damage, and we kind of ended up, I was driving actually to, when we went caroling with the elders, and I was getting out the highway and the clutch exploded. And so, it was a good thing it was right next to Mrs. Zimmerman's house, so he helped me get it back to his house, and we started working on it. And it was, like, I remember, this is probably the most memorable part of the project, because we worked on it maybe 5 or 6 hours a day, and it'd be 5 degrees out. And we were working on it, and I remember one time we had to clear off snow off all the parts just so we could find what parts we were looking for. We had to dig out through the snow. And so we had to fix the clutch. And how this is how a clutch looks. There's one sitting on the table over there, the old rusted one. This is a new clutch. This is what we put into my dad's Focus. And how a clutch works is it sits between the transmission and the engine. And this is on manual cars. They also have automatic cars. But on manuals, you're actually engaging and disengaging the clutch. When you have the clutch disengaged, this is how it looks. When you have that pedal pushed in, it pushes this throwout bearing, which pushes on that spring right there, and pulls the. No, wait, hold on. Let me think for a second. Yeah, this is disengaged. So when you have the pedal in, the throwout bearing is pushing on that spring and pulling back the pressure plate from the flywheel. And the flywheel is part of your engine. Your flywheel is turning like this, and your pressure plate is turning like this. So when you push in the clutch, these two motions are separated, and it allows your engine to keep running, but your gears and wheels not. Your gears and wheels won't turn with the engine, and it disengages the power transfer from the engine to the transmission. But when you let out the clutch, when you engage that clutch, when you let it out, the throwout bearing is no longer pushing on a spring, and those two come together. So the two turning motions come together. And what happens is when you're rough on a clutch, you throw them together really quickly. And what happens, the clutch will slip sometimes, and it'll burn up some of the lining on the clutch. And eventually your clutch will explode if you continue. This is why when you drive a clutch, you have to learn the right way to do it, otherwise you replace the clutch in like 6 months. And our car lasted 4 years, which is pretty good considering 5 people learned how to drive on it. But so we began pulling apart the car. And my dad's car is a front-wheel drive, so everything, and it's super compact, so everything is in the front. So we had to pull apart almost everything just to get to the clutch. We ended up taking out the transmission, the battery, like a ton of engine mounts, and pulling out the air intake, everything. And it took us maybe 2 weeks working almost every day. And it was pretty cool because we had to get to the clutch, and we eventually pulled out the transmission, which once we got it out after like 3 days of working on it, we were cheering because it took a while. But what happened was, as the clutch, eventually, it just blew out. And this is how the new clutch, and that's what the clutch we pulled out. And you can see it is not in good shape. And new ones, old ones, and then that's the lining that's supposed to look like, and that's what was left of that lining inside the car. And apparently, Mrs. Zimmerman was telling me as we were cleaning this up that the lining actually is you have to be careful because it has been known, like some of them has asbestos in it. And so you have to be really careful when you remove it because if you send it into the air and get into your lungs, it can kill you. Which I didn't know, I was just like throwing it around, and he's like, don't do that. And so we got rid of it and we put the new clutch in. And it was pretty cool because, once we finished, because that was a serious project, we spent a lot of time on it. And once we got the car running, and it felt pretty good. And so the next thing was my turn signals on my car. They didn't work at all. And it was weird though, because when we tested it out with the emergency signals, which used the turn signals, they blinked fine. But when they used the turn signals, it didn't work. So we didn't know, I had no idea what was wrong. And Mrs. Zimmerman said, so we checked the fuse box, which is underneath my dashboard. And one of the fuses was blown, and it was a simple fix because we replaced the fuse and the turn signals worked fine. And it was right after the clutch, so it felt really easy. You could do it in 1 day. And so that's how a bad fuse looks like on the left. And the right, see that metal lining? It's connected on the right and not on the left. So you know if a fuse is bad if that transfer piece in there is broken. And so when you replace fuse, and I replaced a few now as I started working. And then the windshield. Oh man. Well, the windshield had a big crack when I got the car, but then I decided to take it joyriding, and I didn't latch the hood correctly. And so as I got to like 65 miles an hour, the hood flew up. And yeah, it resulted in that. And so if I was on the border about replacing the windshield, but now I had to replace it. And I remember I told Mrs. Zimmer, he just let out a long groan. And so it wasn't so good, but I think it was pretty cool. We broke, I think it was 6 utility blades trying to cut out this windshield, and like 2 other blades just trying to cut out the sealant that was between the windshield and the side of the frame of the car. And we used that utility knife to your left, and it took you guys used a utility blade before. It took a utility blade, but you use it in that long handle so you can get more leverage on that sealant. The sealant seals the window of the car to the frame of the car, and so you had to do is, and the sealant's about 3/4 of an inch thick. You had to cut through it, and the problem is the sealant's underneath the glass, but the metal, so the glass goes over the sealant, so you have to go underneath and around the glass. It's a really bad angle. And we spent just a couple days trying to cut it up. We spent 3 hours on one corner of the window, and we barely made an inch. And so we were like, this is ridiculous. And so Mrs. Zimmerman found out, so one of his friends from the junkyard told him that if you spray WD-40 on that sealant, it allows you to cut it faster. And I was like, anything, we can try it, anything will help, it would be great. So we sprayed it around the sealant, which is this thick black, it looks like rubber. And it cut a lot faster. We got through the whole top part of the windshield in one day. And that was pretty cool. And eventually we got it cut out, and so you can see without the windshield. And so we were pretty happy. It took us a long time to get that windshield out. And when we were working on it, Mrs. Zimmer was like, well, the pros and mechanic shops do it in 15 minutes. I was like, no, that's not possible. There's no way. He's like, yeah, they do it in 15 minutes. I'm like, that's just ridiculous. And so, but we got it out after not 15 minutes, but after a while, we finally got it out, and so we could start putting the new one in. And so that was the new windshield we got. And we had to dry fit it first, and so we had to set it on the frame without any glue to see where we wanted to have it sit. We had to sit it just right, otherwise it would be off. And so we used checkpoints, and these are like little pressure, like they press down, when the windshield sits on it, they press down on some of them and they sit on some of these, like just little pieces of plastic that stick out. And we marked it so that it sat perfectly on these, so when we put glue on, we knew just how to put the windshield right back on that frame, so that we didn't have to adjust it once the glue's on there and make a mess of the glue, because this glue is super tough. You had to really work on it to get this glue out. It's not Elmer's. So we got the windshield dry fitted, and we took it back out, and we started using a caulking gun to get the new glue on. But we would you squeeze the caulking gun's handle and the glue comes out. But the problem was it took us 10 minutes to get an inch. We're like, this can't be right, something's wrong. And the glue was expired, expires in a week. So maybe that's the problem. Let's go. So Mr. Z and I took a field trip down to the windshield shop, and there's a little bit of minor setback. And we talked to the guy, and he was like, well, the glue can expire. You could have glue expire for a year, and it still works fine. We do that all the time in our shop. And so he took the glue we were using and put it in one of their caulking guns, and it worked perfectly. And he said that the problem was it was just a really old caulking gun. That was the one on the right, the old one. And it was just broken. It was a simple thing like that, but it slowed us down big time. So we got a new caulking gun, and we got the glue on in half an hour, which is a lot faster than getting the old windshield out. And so we set the windshield on there, and we did some finishing touches, putting the mirror back in, putting some lining up. And just to get at the windshield, you have to pull out the lining, you have to pull out a lot of the stuff around the windshield just so you can get a knife in there and cut out the old one. You can't just attack it right away. And so we put everything back, put the bolts back in, screwed it in, and set everything back up. And once we got the windshield set and sealed, it worked. It worked pretty well, and it went smooth, and it worked well. And so these are some snapshots of the car that I took. It's the 3.8 fuel injected V8. 3.8 is the total space of each space inside the piston. So the 3.8 cubic meters. Yeah, 3.8 cubic meters inside the pistons. And so fuel injected V6, which just means that the fuel comes from the top. And all cars are pretty much fuel injected now, but there's a thing to brag about back in the 90s. And so the camshaft allows the overhead cams. You see like dual overhead cams, so you have two camshafts on top of the pistons, which is like commonplace nowadays with cars. Mustang. There's some snapshots. And then I had a little fun driving around. But yeah, so we did like a lot of the stuff we do. Like I'd come over to Mrs. Zimmerman's to work on my car, and I'd ask him a question on one part, and it ended up leaving like 20 other parts, and we just stand there and talk for like an hour and a half just about car parts, and we didn't even like start working like, oh wait, we have to work, don't we? We're like, oh yeah. And so we started working on a car, but a lot of it, like we just discussed, like I had a lot of free time this year between classes, and so I just go up to Mr. Zimmerman's office and I talk to him just like an hour or two just about how it works and how different parts function. And I learned a lot about cars, like 300% more than I knew, which I didn't know anything, so I learned a lot. And so, I want to talk about like the future of my project. Like, I want to take the knowledge I've learned, be able to use it in the future, be able to maybe when I'm in college or, just after college, if my car breaks down, I want to be able to fix it myself. I don't want to take it to a mechanic who's charging me 6 times the price, Like the new clutch, when we replaced it, the new clutch cost $200. And we replaced it, and a mechanic would charge you $1,000 just to replace it, and then another $200 for the part. And so, it was saving a lot of money, and it's a really cool idea. I really like working on cars. It's a lot of fun, and it's just cool to see how they work. Like when I see something, I want to know how it works. I want to know when I take it apart. I want to see what the inside, how it functions. Like this has definitely taught me not to judge a book by its cover. It makes me want to see, understand someone else's point of view. It makes me understand how a car works and not just it works. And so, and I also, I want to teach others. I want to show other people how it works and be able to teach them to be at that level someday. And so I'd like to thank my parents because they pretty much put all the money into this since I'm not very rich. And my sister for taking some of the pictures that my parents, or my sister takes the pictures. And then Jordan actually helped me a lot in the beginning of my project when I was still finding a car. I wanted to learn something. And so Jordan's brother was replacing, his turbo in his Audi was messed up and he wanted to get a new turbo, but new turbo cost like $2,000.
Yeah, we got
so
it.
Just ended up buying an engine for like $1,000, a whole new engine with a turbo in it already. And so I went with him and his brother to pick up the new engine and I brought it back to his house. And I learned a lot about turbos, and then I went and researched turbos and learned how they work, and it was pretty cool. And I want to thank Mr. Zimmerman for everything he's done. He's put up with my complete knowledge about cars. I probably asked so many stupid questions this year, and he's just put up with it and answered them. I honestly didn't know anything about my cars. Now I know a ton. And I just want to thank you for everything. And I actually got you a present, Mr. Zimmerman, and I'll bring it over to you.
Mr. Zimmerman's opening that every day Mr. Zimmerman would come in and he'd walk into my office and I expected him to start explaining something about what was wrong with the building, and he would start dialoguing about what he'd done with Patrick on the car the night before, and I can tell you from all the projects that you went through, the windshield almost did him in.
Oh man.
Especially when you found out that it was 15 minutes.
I didn't believe it. I still don't believe it, actually.
I love the plate. I have a collection.
You don't have a Virginia one now, so now you got a Virginia for your collection.
It's not big enough for a Mustang.
They're actually 2 space heaters.
So this way he doesn't freeze when he's working on his car display. Looks like he has to stay warm.